Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of What's Your Next, the podcast where we talk all about making bold moves and building a life you actually love. Hi, I'm Stacy Riska, your lifestyle and franchise matchmaker, here to help you do what you love and love what you do. Today's episode is going to be a game changer because we're diving into the topic of franchise secrets they don't tell you, but Johnny will.
Welcome to What's Your Next. This is the go-to podcast for aspiring business owners who want to get to the next level, escape the rat race, and give their middle finger to the corporate 9-to-5. If you want financial freedom, work-life balance, and the business of your dreams, you're in the right place. Dave and Stacy Riska, husband-wife franchising duo, openly share their successes, failures, and lessons learned in franchising, business ownership, and working with your spouse.
Now, if you've ever wondered what really separates thriving franchise owners from the ones who struggle, the real behind-the-scenes stuff that you're not going to find in one of those glossy brochures, you're about to find out. Joining me is no other than John Francis, better known as Johnny Franchise, a guy who's been in the trenches as a multi-unit franchise owner, a top performing executive, and now a sought-after advisor and speaker in the franchise world. He's seen it all, the wins, the wipeouts, and everything in between. And today he's going to pull back the curtain for us. So get ready. This is going to be fun, real, and full of golden nuggets. Get your notebooks ready. Let's dive in. Welcome to the show, Johnny.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Stacy. I appreciate it. I'm glad to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
Hey, we're talking the F word. We're talking franchises today. And your nickname, Johnny Franchise, the question I'm going to ask is, how did you get that nickname?
Yeah, well, it's a good one. You know, someone has to give you a nickname. You can't make your own. So my name is John Francis, and I grew up the youngest of 5 kids in my family. So I was little Johnny growing up. I was, that everyone calls me Johnny. My family, my friends, my wife, my kids, people who really know me, they know me as Johnny Francis. And I was at a conference, a franchise conference here in Minneapolis, checking in, and it was the time where, everyone's kind of getting their name tags and just like, hey, how you been? And, getting started. The program hadn't started, but people were checking in sort of in the lobby area. And one of my good friends here in Minneapolis is a lawyer named Brian Schnell. And Brian he's a good friend. I've known him for a long time, probably 30 years or longer. And he's a big guy like me, right? A big, tall guy, 6'3". And so I see Brian, and he's giving me a big hug, and he says, hey, man, when I see Johnny Francis, he said, when I see you, I think Johnny Franchise. And I laughed, and everybody laughed. And so everyone within earshot at that moment, that week, those couple of days, a weekend or whatever it was, everyone was calling me Johnny Franchise, like a joke. And I thought it was kind of funny, but I thought it was kind of corny, right? And so, but it stuck. And so people would see me at other conferences or later, and they'd say, oh, I want to introduce you to my friend John Francis, but I know him as Johnny Franchise. So it was kind of an inside secret, it was kind of a thing, because I didn't really embrace it. At the time, there was a football guy, a football player, Johnny Manziel, his nickname was Johnny Football. And I'm not much of a sports guy, but what I understand about that poor guy is he made some terrible decisions and kind of flamed out and really had a terrible outcome, right? He might have been a talented player, but he got in trouble in his personal life, and it was kind of awful. And so I didn't want anyone thinking I was trying to be something like him, because I'm not that kind of guy, right? And so I really kind of let it lay, but it wouldn't stop. People would keep like at IFA, they're like, oh, Johnny Franchise, how are you? So it kept going. And then I was having lunch with a good friend of mine, and I was explaining this situation. I said, I like it, but I don't really embrace it. And he said, he said, "What's the matter with you?" He said, "It's perfect. It's exactly what you do and who you are. And, your style is kind of, I'm not a real formal, I'm not an MBA or a certified anything. I'm just a regular guy doing my thing." And I said, "Well, I think it's kind of dumb, it could be kind of stupid." And he said, "It's only stupid if you're stupid." And I said, "Well, I'm not stupid." And he said, "Well, then you're stupid to not embrace it. So go get it." And so I went out and I got the URL and I printed up some cards and I showed up at the next IFA with my card that says, my people call me Johnny Franchise. Like I totally embraced it. So as I was going around the IFA, this was I think like 2017 or 2018, so this, a while ago, and I was handed my card and people said, "Oh, I don't need your card. I know who you are." I'm like, "No, you don't know this." And so I would hand it out with that kind of slogan. They call me Johnny Franchise, and then it was people would have a laugh. And so I actually got my name tag changed to say Johnny Franchise. Like
Oh,
instead
wow.
of John Francis, I said, "Can I change it?" And so anyway, it's stuck and I embrace it. And it is a good nickname for me because franchising is what I know, what I love. It's really what I'm best at is helping people in the franchise business. And it kind of gives I hope it gives the expectation of someone who's not afraid of just telling the truth, right? Tell it like it is. I have no hidden agenda. I'm kind of what you see is what you get. And kind of informal, laid back, but no nonsense. I'm not afraid to say what needs to be said or ask the tough questions or get through to somebody in a way that maybe they haven't before. So anyway, it's my nickname, it's my brand, it's my website, it's all that. So yeah,
You
who I
own it,
am.
claim it. I'm kind of
Yeah.
envisioning like this caricature, superhero kind of guy. And I
Well, I don't want I don't want to go that far. I
well,
like to do what I can. I help where
called
I
a lot
can.
worse.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm sure I've been called plenty worse, but it works for me, and so it's a good thing. Yeah,
Great. Well, then it's clear from the name, you know something about franchises, and you've talked about being at a conference for it.
yeah.
No one wakes up and says, "Hey, I want to buy a franchise." But something tells me you've been doing this a long time. So, what is your journey? How did you get into franchise,
Yeah,
and how does that fast forward get us to what you're doing today?
yeah. Well, my journey is, long. I guess I was born into a franchise company. So my dad was a barber who cut hair back in the 50s here in I'm in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He was a barber and he was a pretty good barber. But he was frustrated because he said, I wasn't born yet. I was the last of the five kids, right? But when he started his career, he said, "This will take forever. I can cut one head of hair at a time, and
Mhm.
there's no way to grow or really scale." And at that time, there were barber shops for men and beauty salons for women, and that was it. And so he's cutting hair and he was kind of frustrated, entrepreneurial kind of guy. He had no education, no advantage. I mean, he really had, not much, but hard work and good values and, a nice guy. And so he started looking around and he found a guy out in California who had a different style, a different technique. It was using a straight edge razor on hair called the European razor cut. And he went out and he watched this guy, learned from this guy how to do that technique. And he said, in order to do this, I need to create a new kind of barbershop, a new high end, full service. And it was for men and for women, right? So it didn't really exist here in Minneapolis. It might have been in California and probably on the East Coast somewhere. But so he innovated and created a new brand and a new concept. It was an upscale, full service barbershop that had hair dryers and used products on men's hair, right? Men didn't use, they had the lotion and stuff, but that was it. So he really went out on a limb and my mom and dad together started this brand and started a new concept and it worked. And this was in 1963, right? Before I still wasn't born yet, right? My brother and older sisters might have been around. So it worked. And long story short, he built another one. He built another one. He had five barber shops. and he was making real money, like real money for him at the time. And the managers of the barber shops said, look, we see what's going on here. We want a piece of the action. And he said, well, hold on a minute, okay, you're good guys, you're helping me, but this is my business. Let me find a way to create an opportunity for you. Someone said, why don't you franchise it? What's that? Right? Because at the time there were hotels, restaurants, and gas stations, and that was about it in the franchise world in the middle 60s. This was about, I think, 1968 or so, 5 years later.
Oh,
So he sent those five managers, became franchisees, and they went off. They went about 100 miles in every direction and set up barbershop, the same brand, the same model, the same everything. He kept the original five for himself, my dad, but he had five franchisees who came out of his business, and they became franchisees, and they were barbers. And it worked. It worked for four of the five. Now, one of them didn't make it, but that's another story. So those four guys went on to be quite successful, and they were barbers. They didn't have business education. They didn't know what they were doing. They were just doing it, right? And so and then this was late 60s, right? So they're franchising barbershops in the Midwest, and it worked. And those guys would build three, four, five of their own in their market. So now you had barbers being business owners well beyond cutting hair one head at a time, right? He created a way to scale that business that had never really been done before. And again, long story short, in the 70s, it took off. They raised some money and franchised, made all the classic mistakes, went too far, too fast, right? Burned up all the cash. But they did open a bunch of stores, and he brought in a lot of talented people. He was not afraid to bring in the right people. And he had some great people, some hardworking, high quality, high values. And again, it worked. And so in the 70s, we became a national brand about the middle 70s with about 250, 300 stores, salons all over the place. And that's when I was old enough to start paying attention. So I thought everything was a franchise. I thought everybody owned two or three businesses and everybody worked for themselves, except the people that worked for us. So I grew up running around the office, and we had a product business. So running through the warehouse and playing around with the forklift and stuff. And then in the 70s, again, it grew, and they went through all the typical cycles of an entrepreneur owned business, the highs and the lows and just chaos, but they kept growing. In the 80s, we got a little more sophisticated, right? I was in middle school, right? Then they're hiring a real president, and they created another brand called Cost Cutters in 1982. And this was the same time that Great Clips started and Supercuts was starting. And so that whole category was just beginning. But we had a background in the salon industry. So we engineered the Cost Cutters model. It was built to be a multi-unit franchisee model and owned by a non-hair salon, owner investor type, not a barber hair cutter. And that worked. And so in the 80s, that exploded and took off, and it quickly outgrew the original brand, right? And in the 80s, then in the later 80s, we innovated the original brand and created what was called City Looks, which was a high-end full-service spa concept where they did hair, skin, and nails and massage and full-on spa salon concept. And so they franchised that. In the 90s, now I'm through high school and college in the 80s. So I come to work I worked for my dad, and my brother, who was 10 years older than me, was a franchisee. So I was helping him in his businesses. He owned a bunch of salons here in the Minneapolis area, and he managed my dad's original five, right? That they were still running, and we converted some of those to Cost Cutters and City Looks. And then that brand, so I went to work in the franchisor and started doing franchise real estate, site selection. We had a family real estate company when I was in college. I managed commercial properties. So I'd been a landlord. So now I'm working with the franchise development people doing site selection all over the country. It was fantastic. And then I went to franchise sales, franchise real estate, then operations, marketing, training. I never cut hair. I never got that far. Right? But product and distribution, finance, accounting, acquisitions, international, and then strategic planning for the business. So I worked in our franchisor for about 15 years. I spent 5 years doing international franchising in Europe and Russia. I could tell you stories about Moscow in the 90s. We did 4 acquisitions. We started with a small brand of about 10 stores, converted them over, franchised them out. Then we did a second and a third one. The third one I was involved with was 33 stores in New England, based in Connecticut. And that was a fantastic opportunity for us to bring our brand up to New England. And we converted all those stores. And I knew every shopping center in New England for a few years. Then the last acquisition we did was in 1996. We bought 130 stores. And I led that acquisition. I got to do the whole project and converted those units and franchise. It was a fantastic outcome for us, good for them, good for the brand, good for everybody. It was a pretty successful deal. My dad died in 94 from cancer. My mother took over, so we kind of anticipated that. Mom had beefed up the board of directors, right? We were publicly traded then. By then, we were on NASDAQ in the 90s. We got listed on NASDAQ. It was easier to be a public company, 30 years ago. And then my older brother died in 97. So that was unexpected. That was a car accident. And that was what upset the apple cart, if you will. My mom kind of, disappeared for a little while, went through some terrible, it affected the whole family and really a lot of people. I mean, it was a terrible, tragic loss. So mom came back to work about a year later, and I was sitting at the board. I was an observer of the board. I couldn't serve on the board because I was family and I was one of the vice presidents, but they let me sit there as long as I didn't say anything. And anyway, mom comes back and she says, "You know what? I want to retire. I'm done with this." And the board is like, "Well, okay, we're not going to try to change your mind. We understand what you've been through with your husband and your son, and this business is quite, it was quite complicated and had its own politics and drama. And you can imagine, we were at about 1,000 stores, right, at that time. And so the board put together a secondary offering. We went to the investment bank. We were going to sell half of her shares so she could retire and still have control. And I was on track to move up, right? Every year I'd get a new job and I was moving up the organizational ladder. I was trying to get to the top. I wanted to run the company one day. We put it out and it turned into an auction, right? It was the late 80s, or I'm sorry, late 90s. And things were pretty hot. The market was hot. And this was before private equity was a big deal in franchise. And so we had a big competitor at that time was called Regis Corporation, and they were the consolidator. They had just bought Supercuts, and they didn't know franchising. Regis at the time had 4,000 stores. Most of them were corporate owned, mall based Regis salons, and they had a lot of other brands, and they were buying up brands, but they didn't understand franchise. So we came along, and the board, I'm sitting at the board meetings like, no, 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 what are you doing? They're saying, we're going to sell this company. Regis said, we'll buy the whole thing. And I'm like, no, we got a plan, and mom's going to retire, and I'm going to keep going, and we got a good thing. Don't ruin this. And the board said, look, kid, get out of the way. We've got a fiduciary responsibility to the other shareholders. We're going to get a great value if we sell this thing at maximum. So there were a couple other contenders, but Regis came back with their highest best offer. We got an 18 times multiple, which is insane, right? And this is in 1999. So we sold 1,000 stores for 59 million. Back in those days, that was a huge deal, right?
Yeah.
And so there was no way for me to stop that deal. The board is like, you're going to be fine, kid. Your family's fine. You're going to be fine. Don't worry about it. And so I did what I promised to do was I got to integrate our company inside of Regis. So I got to take our whole organization apart and put it back together inside of their umbrella. And they were very capable. They were a very good buyer, I would say. They knew what they were doing, very sophisticated, very capable company. and they treated everyone very fairly. Everybody who wanted a job got a job. And even I got a job. I got to keep my title, vice president of whatever, right? And mom retired, the president retired, a lot of the other executives bailed out, like you would expect. So spent 9 months doing the transition and integration. And at the end, when the smoke had cleared and franchisees were okay and everything was kind of settled down, I said, I don't own it anymore. I don't want to be here. I don't feel motivated. I'm an owner. I'm hardwired to be an owner.
Mhm.
So I left. But it was okay, right? I got to focus on my family and help my mother. We basically set up a family office to manage that. And I had three sisters, right? We had lost my brother, but three sisters older than me, and we invested in some other stuff and got into all kinds of. So I took a year and a half off, got married. It was fabulous. So then I came back and said, I love franchising, but I had to stay out of the salon business. But there's lots of other businesses. And I said, what do I know? I know retail, I know strip center, real estate, I know franchising inside and out. I'd been a franchisee, I'd been the franchisor, I'd done international, I'd done acquisitions, I'd done integrations, I'd done every position in the company, in the organization. So I had a tremendous experience. And I was 32.
Wow.
So it was pretty early. I was probably 10 years younger than my experience would have, so I had a good head start. So I got involved in another brand as a regional developer and built two states. I had a franchisee, and then I worked with the franchisor and had a good run there, and then did a few other brands and got it simultaneous. I would get opportunities. People would find me or know me and say, hey, why don't you take a look at this one? What do you think of this? And I'd look at a brand and I'd say, well, that's okay, but you don't have this, you don't have this, and you don't have this. And they'd say, well, why don't you help us? Well, okay, what make it worth my while? How do you, so I'd partner in or they bring me in. And so what I learned, Stacy, is I got really good at helping brands grow and like fixing where they were stuck. So
Mhm.
I'm not much of a startup guy, like the early stage, like, hey, I got a great idea, let's franchise this. That's not my specialty. My specialty is when a brand is growing and things are starting to go wrong. What's wrong and what do we do about it? I mean, that's really my specialty. So I thought everybody did what we did. You're used to what you grow up with. So we had a fantastic organization. We won a lot of awards. My parents were well respected, well recognized. My parents are in the IFA Hall of Fame
Oh,
for what they did in the franchising industry. Some of the things we did with cost cutters were very innovative and became standard practice in franchising. My dad is in the Barber Hall of Fame because he changed the industry. He created a path for barbers to become business owners well beyond what anyone else had done in the industry ever. And so I grew up with that, thinking that's normal, right? Doesn't everyone do this sort of thing? And so I've been in and out of a lot of different brands. I've been a franchisor 5 times. I've been a franchisee 6 times. And today I like to say I don't really own or operate anything with the day-to-day responsibilities. I've kind of, I get to do what I want. And so I serve on a number of boards. I'm a good board member, board of directors, which is fiduciary, and I take that role very seriously. And then board of advisors, which is a little less formal, but a lot more fun because you can really get involved as much as you want, help the founder, and help the team and really balance the interests there. I work as a coach. I have a handful of clients that I do one-on-one executive coaching. And then I have the mastermind groups right now that are it's called Zor Forum. So I'm technically a franchisee again, but I kind of feel like the franchisor. It's a very small brand, but I have got two groups of franchisors where we meet once a month, and it's this collaborative environment. A peer group or a mastermind. It's not a new format, but this one is exclusive for franchisors. And so I'm having a lot of fun helping those people. I say I can't afford to work with you one on one because they can't afford me and I can't afford the time. But if I put them in a group, then they can afford me and I can afford the time. And if it turns into something more, if I help them with a project or some issue or something else beyond the group, that's fine. So I love to help people get it right. Right? I don't want to buy anything. I don't want to sell anything. I don't want to run anything. I certainly don't want a job, but I want to make an impact without getting involved. So I've been able to do that for a lot of different brands. Today, I probably have 20 different clients at different levels. I've involved with probably 50 different brands over the last 15 years. And I just love helping people get it right. So I try to help where I can, or I'm happy to get out of the way. And I've been involved in IFA. I've served on the IFA board 2 times myself as a franchisor and as a franchisee. I've worked with supplier companies that want to bring their service or product deeper into the franchising world. And when I see one that seems better than average and with people who have integrity, those are the kind of things that I look for. And like I said, I just love it when people get it right, when everyone does what they're supposed to, the franchisor, the franchisee, and the suppliers, when everybody does what they need to do properly, everybody wins. And it's a powerful wealth creator and a success generator and a lifestyle changer. And I grew up with that. I lived through that. And then I've helped other people do that over and over and over again. And so it's now I guess I'm the old guy now, right? I used to be the young guy, 10 years younger. Now I'm 10 years older than anybody else. And but I still like to help. I like to say I'm not a know-it-all, but I'm a share-it-all. So I'll tell you what I think, and I'll ask questions to make you think differently about your situation or your business. And I can usually diagnose a problem pretty quickly and then give you 3 or 5 different ways to solve that problem. But I'm unattached to the outcome, right? I really like you do what you're going to do. I tell my clients, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to help make you think about it. You decide what you're going to do, and then I'll support that, right? So I don't know. I have a ball doing it. I love what I'm doing. I'm the luckiest guy I know. And by the way, I'm married. I have 2 lovely daughters. One's in graduating college, one's graduating high school. And so I'm a lucky guy. I work as much as I want, and I get to be very selective with the people I work with.
What a journey.
Yeah.
Literally
Well,
born.
I hope that wasn't too much. I don't know.
I don't even know where to start. You were born into franchising. You've literally had every role. The only one I thought of that you didn't have is barber. You
Yeah.
never cut hair, but you have
Yeah.
good hair.
No,
And
I asked my dad, should I go to barber school? Should I learn how to cut? He's like, no, I sent you to college and business school so you can run the business. Don't hire the talent who's better at cutting hair. They'll be better than you ever will be. You run the business, let them do the technical side. And I'm like, oh, good idea. So yeah, you're right. That's about the only thing I haven't done in that industry. But I still am in the salon industry still. I serve on the board of directors at Sport Clips out of
okay,
Texas,
yeah,
which is a great brand, great people, great owner, privately held, which is fantastic. Very successful, consistent, I would say, solid people, great culture, fantastic culture. And they're at almost 2,000 salons, so that's big enough.
yeah.
It's a big, complicated brand, but like I said, great leadership, great people, and it's fun to be associated with that brand and stay in the industry that way.
You've seen so much, and I know you've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah,
So let's
yeah,
talk about, from what you've seen, what differentiates a successful franchise owner from one who for some reason struggles and falters out of the system. What do you see as the big
yeah.
differentiator?
Well, the big difference I would say is mindset. I mean, it really comes down to how you think, how you see the world, maybe attitude.
Mm-hmm.
The better franchisees recognize that they're part of a brand. You bought the unit, you bought the business, and you're opening your store or you're delivering your service in your market or whatever it is. But understand the power of the network you're in. I like to say the franchisee's job is to implement and execute, not experiment. The franchisor's job is to develop and innovate the support, the training, the systems, the technology, all the different things that go into making that model successful. The franchisee's job is to implement that model consistently and completely, not just the parts you like or the parts you think you understand, the whole thing. And I tell franchisees, if you're not sure what to do or how to do it, then stop what you're doing and ask for help. Ask the franchisor, ask another franchisee, ask a vendor or a supplier if they're involved with that piece of the business. You never have to wonder and you never have to experiment. All you have to do is get the advice, get the support, take the training, and follow that model consistently. I hear it all the time. My market's different. Well, that might work up in Minnesota, but that's not going to work here in Florida or California or anywhere else.
Mhm.
Like, no, it isn't. The only difference is you. It's the same business, it's the same industry, it's the same competitors, it's the same market. The owner is what's different. I said, so get your head on straight, follow the model, and we'll help you implement the model. I'll help you. My team will help you. You need help with marketing, you need help with product, you need help with whatever training, whatever component. The finances are out of whack. Let's get into your financials and clean up your accounting, whatever. If you need help, the brand should be able to provide all the service and support that you really need. Your job is to implement and execute as a franchisee and ask for help. I say a good franchisee will ask for everything in the world, but realize you won't get everything you ask for. But keep asking for help and keep taking the advice. And if they tell you, well, you got to do it this way, and if you say, well, I don't like doing it that way, I would tell you then sell the franchise to someone who does,
Mhm.
because you shouldn't be in you're not in a franchise business to create a better way of doing it. Now, once you've achieved success in a brand and you're good at it and you're healthy and content, franchisees do come up with the better ideas. They create better products, better approaches, better techniques. That's great. Innovation can come up through the brand. You take that innovation, you share it with the franchisor. Their job is to recognize it, capture that innovation, clean it up and standardize it, and then redistribute it across the whole brand.
Mhm.
People know that the Egg McMuffin was made
Right.
by a franchisee, right? Fantastic. Whoever it was recognized, hey, that sells pretty well, and we could do that. Let's standardize that. Now everybody sells Egg McMuffin.
Mhm.
So a good franchisee will share their positive innovations, but only after you've achieved a certain level of success. If you're struggling to figure out, I got to make some money here, what am I supposed to do? Put everything down and pick up the phone and call somebody at your corporate office, call a successful franchisee, call someone in that brand. You're part of a huge network,
Mhm.
and franchisees don't leverage that network enough, in my opinion. The ones that struggle are because they think they're alone and they got to figure out how to do this. No, you don't. You got to figure out what to do and when to do it, and then just do it, and then know what's next, and do that, and then what's next, and keep stacking on the appropriate implementation, and you'll be successful as a franchisee. So it's mindset is and then be nice, be smart, hire well, watch your nickels and dimes because they turn into dollars, and yeah, I mean, you got to have some common sense, and you got to be trainable, coachable. You got to be reasonable. I say if you get sideways with your franchisor and you really don't like them, you should sell your business,
Yeah.
because if you're just going to fight, I mean, what's the point? I like to say a franchise agreement is not a life sentence, right? You can parole yourself out of here if you can. Franchises are easy to get into, and frankly, they're easy to get out of because the buyer is buying the brand, not what you're selling. So sometimes it's better to just move on if it's really not a fit, or it's not what you expected, or you hate the people, or you hate the business, or you made a bad choice. You don't have to struggle forever. If you can't figure it out, then sell that business while you've got something to sell. I hate to see failure, but I've seen it. I've lived it. I've had my share. I've filled dumpsters with equipment. I know how it feels, and it's awful. But sometimes, things go wrong. That's life.
Those war stories can be our biggest learning moments. So I know you
Yeah.
have a no BS style, and there's got to be one story in that dumpster that's happened. So share one war story that maybe was a lesson learned that had a positive ending for you.
Oh boy. There's a few. I got to think of one. I don't know. Probably the most interesting thing, I think rewarding as a franchisee is the impact you can make on your people.
Yeah,
So I had a store. I was running these stores. The brand was called Postnet. It's still around. It's a
yeah,
pack and ship meets print and copy.
yeah.
And I was in. It was a great time for me to enter that brand. They were everywhere else but the Midwest, Upper Midwest. Like if you looked at a map, everything was colored in except my area. Perfect time to jump in, right? And so I got involved in that brand, and they're good people. And this was back in I guess it was 2001. So it was early, 25 years ago, right? A long time ago. And I got into that brand and I opened a store, and man, I was committed and focused, and it took off and we had great success. And I was the regional developer. So I was selling franchise, well, not technically not selling, but promoting the franchise and supporting my owners in my territory. And I was looking for managers. I needed staff to keep growing my stores. I wanted my own multiple units. And so I had this great manager. Her name was Karen, and she was really good. And side story, she got me hooked on Caribou coffee, right? The good
Okay.
coffee. So she'd come in, we're open the store together. It was a brand new store, and she'd bring two coffees. And I'm like, oh, this is great. And after about a week, she showed up without the coffee. I'm like, well, where's the coffee? She said, they're kind of expensive, And I said, well, look, here's, whatever, $5 or $10. Go get the coffee. So now I'm buying the coffee, right? She was smart. So and that became the thing is she would buy the coffee. I would pay for it, but she'd go get it. So anyway, we're drinking coffee. The store's doing fine. And the Caribou was like a couple doors down in the center where we were. It was just near, like just a few doors down. And she came back one day with the coffee and she says something's wrong with Betsy. Betsy was the manager at the Caribou that was in our same shopping center. She said something's wrong. And I'm like, I don't know. What do you think? She said, I don't know. She just seemed off. I said, well, go back there and ask her what happened. What happened? And so she went back there because now we're friends with the manager of the coffee shop, right? We're
Right,
everyday regulars. And
right.
so she goes back and talks to Betsy, and Betsy said, well, the district manager, these were corporate stores. The district manager was in her coffee shop and disrespected her in front of her team.
Mm.
And Karen said, well, John would never do that. And she's like, I know. I mean, she knew me too, right? And so Karen comes back and she tells me what's about it. I said, send her back. I said, go find out when she's done with work. When is her shift over today? And I said, ask her if she can stop by the store and we'll go for a walk. So anyway, Betsy comes over and she's done. And I take her for a walk. We're walking around the parking lot. And I said, tell me what happened, And she's telling me all about it. And I said, have you had enough of that brand yet? Are you ready? I said, I'm building stores. I need, Karen, you know me, you see what we're doing. I mean, our place was busy and going. And I said, I need talent. And I know what you're capable of. I need your kind of skill. Can you come work for me? So she took a pay cut, right? I couldn't afford what she was paying or what she was getting paid. And I said, well, I'll treat you right. I'll create opportunity like you've never had. And so she did. So she gave her notice. She came to work with Karen. So we trained her in, and then I was opening stores and I moved her into another store, and she was a superstar manager. And it created a lot of opportunity for her. And I would move her, I would open a new store and take her with me. So I would open a store and crank it up, and then I'd sell that unit to a franchisee and say, she comes with me. So you're going to work behind the counter because I wasn't working behind the counter anymore. I was out selling constantly. Anyway, Karen was good. She stayed in the store. She sold her a store, actually. She became a franchisee. And Betsy came with me and stayed with me for a long time. And she won awards in that brand that no manager had ever won before. Like she behaved like an owner. She had that mindset and the attitude. And I said, my goal is to create opportunity for you. You tell me where the roadblocks are, and I will blow them out of your way. So she hired and trained and ran, and people loved her. The customers were loyal, and we were premium. I'm like, well, if they're not complaining about price, we're raising our prices. We were full service, full price retail, and so it created great opportunities for me. Those businesses were very successful. I won all the awards a guy could win in the brand. as franchisee of the year twice. That had never happened before. Um, she won awards and she went, I mean, it was a great outcome. So the benefit is the struggle she went through, and at least we were available to recognize that, God,
Mhm.
she deserves better than that. So I created an opportunity for her that turned into a great outcome for her. It was a great run. It was a great run. So the impact you can make on people's lives and their families, to me, that's even more important than economic success. I mean, obviously you want to make money and be successful, pay your bills, pay off your debt. There's nothing better than positive cash flow, right? But the people matter. And if you know that and understand that, you create that culture, and it's hard to beat that.
Amen to that. Yeah. And I talk to a lot of candidates who are open to learning and exploring about franchise ownership. And a lot of what you just alluded to is exactly what they're looking for. So I'm curious then on the other side of it, on the franchisor side, because I'm matching them to about, I have 600 brands in my inventory. And
Yeah.
many of them, they're good, but they get to you'll look at how many units they have and they get stuck, whether it's 50, 100, and
Yeah.
they're just always stuck. They're not really growing. But yet your trajectory is incredible. There's got to be a secret recipe in there. So from the franchisor side, why are they getting stuck and not growing?
Usually it's leadership, frankly. There's a thing out there called founder syndrome. You can actually look this up. It's a real thing. I've seen it. I didn't know it had a name, but there's a thing called founder syndrome where the founder who starts a business and really loves that it's their baby and it's so good, and they get rolling and someone says franchise, okay, great, we're going to franchise, and they're probably unprepared, undercapitalized, and so they franchise anyway because people do that, and they get to a certain level where it's bigger than them and they don't know how to get out of their way, and they don't know how to bring in, now not always, right? Some brands make that transition quite naturally, but usually the entrepreneur founder has trouble letting go and letting other people do their jobs to the level that is better than what they can do themselves. So that's usually not always the case, but that's usually a symptom of the problem. And then you got to understand more of what's going on or what's gone wrong in that business. I like to look at the balance sheet and see, where did the money go, and what kind of situation do we have there. But leadership really does matter. And if you can get the right leaders, and so what I do when I come along is I'll help that owner see what they're doing to themselves. It's always unintentional. I mean, they're not trying to stifle the growth or frustrate people, but if they're churning a lot of talent is coming and going, that's an indicator that that's the problem. So I'll help them create structure and accountability, and I'll coach them on how to manage people differently than I say. I take a founder and make them a CEO, right? Because it's a different skill set. You're always the founder. No one can take that from you. But you don't have to be the one to touch everything and control everything everywhere. You're going to be a bottleneck in more ways than you can imagine. So there are systems and programs and talent and just experiences that I can help people learn from and show them how to break through that level of stuck. They get stuck. It happens all the time. I mean, not all the time. It's very common. And it usually starts, a brand will start out and they get 5 or 10 units, and hey, things are starting to happen. They're making money, so they start spending money.
Mm-hmm,
Well, then they spend too much money, and then
mm-hmm,
they start to slow down, and the performance drops, and the validation drops. And now they're really in trouble. Now maybe you've sold a bunch of units. Maybe franchisees have committed to 3 or 4 or 5 of these, but you don't have the resources to execute. Now you're in trouble.
mm-hmm.
I call that Death Valley, right? Because
Right.
usually you die. The brand goes down. Maybe somebody comes in and buys it. Maybe it just falls apart and disintegrates, which is tragic, right? It doesn't have to be that way. So usually I try to get to people before that happens, right? When they recognize things are out of control or they don't know why people are upset or frustrated. Why are my franchisees so angry? Well, that's an indicator something's wrong,
Mm-hmm.
right? So let's figure out what's wrong and what we can do about it. And it's usually not a quick fix. It's usually a complicated fix. It might take 3 or 4 different phases of transition. But I've done it enough to recognize the patterns and the bottlenecks and be able to share with that founder what it takes to become that CEO and how you make those different changes and different decisions and bring the right people with you. And sometimes you got to let people go. People who've been there forever, maybe they were great when you started, but they really don't fit now. And those are hard decisions, and it's really difficult work. And then really bringing in the right franchisees. The right franchisees really make a difference, and making sure they have clear expectations of what's expected and how they're going to be successful together with you. It's that interdependency, right, that really makes a brand successful. So it's not just one thing, and it's not always the same thing. But it looks the same to me anyway. I see the same patterns and I recognize those patterns, and then I can, if a person is really motivated and has integrity, again, they got to be willing to do the hard work and make the tough decisions and and if they're willing to do that and think about it more than just I'm going to build it to sell. What really frustrates me is when I see brands who get going and they start selling like crazy and then they toss it over to private equity.
Mm-hmm,
Uh,
mm-hmm.
I don't think that's as common anymore. The whole phrase responsible franchising has been chatter for the last few years.
Mm-hmm.
And I respect that and I agree with that, but I thought, isn't that what we've been doing all along? I mean,
Right.
isn't that what it's supposed to be? Why is that a new thing, right? And so I think private equity has its thing and it adds value. And I've seen those deals done very well, and I've seen those deals miserable failures because the alignment is just not there. And you got to have the same kind of values and the same kind of commitment of success is more than just numbers on a page, right? If you, this is silly, but I used to say when I used to sell franchises, I would say if all we were interested in is making all the money we could, we'd all be drug dealers and prostitutes. But we're not, right? Because we've got integrity and we realize, this is a real business. It's not just a scam. And so it takes a bigger commitment. And you have to be motivated beyond just raw, pure profit. I think to be a successful franchisee and a successful franchisor, you have to play the long game. Now you get to the point where private equity comes along and takes you to that next level of ability and capacity and horsepower. That's a lot of fun. I've seen that and I've helped facilitate that. I've been on the other side of that. Sometimes I get to ride along, right, in those deals. Um, but that's not for everybody. And it's certainly not as easy as it looks. I think people only hear about the home run winners and they don't hear about the carnage and the pain and suffering that happens when it's done wrong. Now, I think that's maybe changed in the last couple of years. I think people are understanding things better and willing to share some of their experiences when things don't go well. So maybe it's gotten a little better in sense of people have more realistic expectations. But I still think disclosures are important, the FDDs, and you got to read them and understand it and use it as a basis for asking better questions. When you're looking at if I'm a franchisee looking at a deal, I'm going to scrutinize that FDD first, but then I'm going to talk to all the franchisees I can meet and go visit and spend a day in the life of that brand. What's it really like running this business in any market, anywhere in the country? What's the culture like? You can't read culture in a FDD. You have to experience that firsthand by talking to people and spending time with people. And are these the kind of people you want to associate with? Because it's not all the same. And it's hard to change a culture. Every brand has a culture, whether you realize it or not. Some are more intentional and some are really unintentional. But that culture is real. So I look for those kind of things, beyond just the pure economic benefits.
Well, Johnny, you've given my audience so much to consider and synthesize. And no doubt from your decades of experience, you have consolidated all of that into what I understand you have a 10 tips resource that you're
I
offering.
do. I do. Someone told me, you know so much. How can you make it easy to help other people? I said, well, talk to me. Well, I can only talk so much. I love it. You can tell I love to tell stories. But so I created the top 10 tips for franchisees. And my goal was to create legitimate technical or tactical techniques that don't cost anything. None of it is like write a bigger check or hire a coach. That's not it, right? It's things you can do as an owner operator in a franchise system to take advantage of being in a franchise system. There are certain inherent advantages if you understand it well enough. And so I created those top 10 tips. They're available on my website. You'll put the link here, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at my screen over here. So there's a landing page. Here's what it says.
Yep.
Simple strategies to maximize success. Well, nothing's easy. You got to know that. Collaborating with franchisees, that's key. Lots of ways to learn from each other inside of a brand. Positive relationships, mindset and attitude. You have to control your attitude. If you can't control the way you respond versus react, right? If you don't know the difference between responding and reacting, then you got to work on your self-control, right? Because if you just react, you're going to get yourself in trouble. You have to calm down, listen, think, and then respond, right? So ways of building those relationships inside a brand, and then really how to plan ahead, right? Most franchisees are struggling with the here, today, right now. I got this problem, and this is an urgent matter. Okay, you got to focus on that, but you got to think beyond today and think about tomorrow and the next day and the next month and the next year, and think about how you get out of this business. And how do you position it well so that you have the ability to sell that business, or maybe you keep it, maybe you transition it to your children or somebody else who you want to create an opportunity that they didn't expect, or get into multiple units, which is fantastic in the right business. Not every business is built for multiple unit ownership. I've seen that before. But the ones that are, like our salon business, where I told you about in the start of the conversation, we engineered that thing to be a multi-unit model, and it worked fantastically well. So there's more. There's lots of things, and I'm happy to share ideas. Like I said, I'm not a know-it-all. I'm a share-it-all. So I've got a website with a blog. I've written a monthly blog for like 8 years. There's a ton of stuff there. I show up as a speaker, as a coach, an advisor, a mentor, sometimes an investor, but pretty rare, right? I'm not looking for that anymore. I don't need those complications. I just want to help other people do what they do better. And if I can help a franchisee or two and help a franchisor or two, the ripple effect of success is what I like to see.
Great. Well, Johnny, thank you so much. We're going to share that resource below along with your contact information. No doubt you have lived up to the name Johnny Franchise, but somehow I don't think you're done yet. So I always have to ask my last question of my guests is, what's your next?
My next is adding to my groups. I have groups for franchisors, and I've been given approval to do groups for franchisees. So I'm thinking about that. The group format is very powerful because I can share and learn, and people can learn from me, but they can learn from each other. And I love to facilitate those meetings and help create that environment of collaborative problem solving. It's powerful. So that's my next, is to do more of those groups and use that as a way to extend my reach and hopefully the positive impact I can help in the franchising world.
Johnny, thank you so much for joining me and my audience today, sharing your stories, wonderful tips, great stories. I love the name. You are breathing proof that the franchise model works. So thank you for joining us today on What's Your Next, and hope everybody here has a great day. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.